Welcome to the Sweet Science of Fighting podcast. Today, returning guest, Martin Bingisser. Welcome, Martin.
Hey, nice to be back on. Nice to catch up with you again.
Yeah, I know. It's been a long time. What have you been up to recently? You just mainly coaching?
Yeah, I forget the last time I've been on.
I was still in New Zealand, so it was over 2 years ago.
So still coaching hammer throw predominantly. I mean, that's my first passion was as a hammer thrower myself and coaching hammer. And I've been Swiss national coaching the hammer for 11 years now, 12 years. So still going strong there. I've got some good athletes coming through in Switzerland and working with some elite athletes outside of Switzerland as well. And so that's the main priority at the moment, doing some, odd consulting jobs that come up here and there, different sports. And my website, Hammer Media, that's HMMR Media, still pumping out some podcasts and some good content on strength and conditioning up there, and probably some of the topics we'll talk about today. So yeah, it hasn't changed a whole lot. I probably focused a bit more in the past couple of years on coaching as I've gotten some real world-class athletes working with me, and less on the online stuff. And it's, as you know from your own experience, it's a lot of the athletes, a lot of the coaches out there who have a big web presence. It's hard to be both an elite coach and an elite content producer. And at some point, especially when I have a day job as well, that something's got to give. So, yeah. But still juggling those different plates, even if one's a little bit different balance than the other over the years.
Yeah, if you guys haven't checked it out, hmmrmedia.com, legit content on there. I haven't contributed for a few years, I don't think, so I'm going to have to try to get you over some stuff for that too. For anyone, I guess you guys are in combat sports listening, but plenty of stuff that carries over. And even though Martin's from that hammer throwing background, lots of things we can still talk about and carry over too, especially with your experience training under Bondarchuk. We can talk a lot of that. We can talk special strength. I think we might even start there regarding, I guess, special strength and specificity. And maybe we can start with, what specificity even is, because I think a lot of people can get confused with Instagram and see their favorite special or specific exercises that transfer to XYZ. And it's usually just a movement with some bands as made as the specific exercise. So maybe you want to jump in there and just, okay, what even is specificity or special strength training?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a rabbit hole, and when you have these terms like specific training or functional training, and they're all slightly different definitions, but you have also within those complete bastardizations of the term. So like people can really go off the deep end and lose sight of what the original intent was. And I know Vern's been a mentor to both you and me, and he's quote unquote the founder of functional training, and most things done in the name of functional training nowadays would drive him crazy. And Bondarchuk, who is really one of the, I wouldn't say founding fathers of specific strength, but he's one of the ones who really helped popularize the concept and the importance there. If he looks at a lot of the stuff people do in the name of specific strength now, it would drive him crazy. So for me, I think like how I look at specific strength is really trying to, you're trying to focus on the movement of your sport and trying to overload some element of it. So you're basically trying to break down your sport a bit and overload it. And, the difference between traditional strength training and specific strength training is that it's going to start to bring in some of the technical elements of your sport, some of those specific movement patterns, whereas general strength training is not. And, we can talk about Bondarchuk's exercise classification if you want, but that's at a high level. That's how I look at it, is trying to really hone in on some of the specific movements and trying to overload those in specific ways.
When does it go too far? When you're not overloading anything? Is that just how you're seeing it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people focus on things that look similar. So they focus on that movement part, but they lose sight of what they're actually overloading. And on the one hand, there might not even be any overload. A lot of band exercises, they look cool, but are you really getting much of a stimulus from, a small band or something like that, enough to really drive any type of change or adaptation? But the other thing is, movement is complex, and what part of the movement you want to overload, how you think about that is going to be a key driver in whether it's actually going to affect performance. For example, in the hammer throw, we have several different elements. It's a close skill sport, so it's relatively simple when you compare it to rugby, which is a sport we've both been involved in and talk about a lot, or, martial arts or something like that, where you have, 100 different movement variations that could be combined 100 different ways, and you have basically infinite type of movements. The hammer throw, we're basically doing one type of thing, but within that you have the starting movement, you have the kind of the middle phase, you have the release phase, and all these different things. And you might look at something and say, okay, this looks really close to the starting phase of the throw. So we're going to overload that and we're going to use that in training. But if you take a step back, well, maybe the start of the throw only contributes 3% to the performance. So you're overloading a part that's not really that important. So that's something I think people can lose the sight on, or what does the athlete really need to work on? Maybe the start of their throw is already in the top 1%. Overloading that's probably not going to get them much benefit. They need to work on some other element to actually get better. So doing that analysis and figuring out, okay, what part of the movement do we want to overload? What are the athlete's strengths that we want to build on? What are the athlete's weaknesses that we need to work on? Those types of things, and doing that analysis and then seeing where do we want to develop some exercises instead of just saying, this looks pretty similar, let's do that, and we just assume it's going to get better.
When people hear overload, they may think, okay, overloading exercise, it means we're just going to add weight to it. Is that what you're thinking? Or are you thinking further, hey, maybe we can overload the speed or other aspects?
Exactly. I mean, that's part of it. You can overload the weight, you can overload the speed, you can overload the intensity. So, for example, in a fighting sport or something, maybe you're doing a block, sparring, but with, let's say you throw 5 punches every 30 seconds. I'm just making up numbers here because I know nothing about this. But your goal is going to be, okay, in a 30-second block, we're going to throw 10 punches. So you're overloading there, also on kind of a fitness component as well, trying to get more movement within that block of time. We can, in the hammer throw, we throw a 16-pound hammer, so 7 kilos. We can also throw a 5-kilo hammer. So that's going to be overloading the speed element because we're going faster than we would normally. And we can throw heavier. We can throw, there's a lot of different elements you can impact to get overload. But the thing is, you're trying to get some variation. If you're just doing the same thing over and over, you're probably not going to get better. So it's trying to figure out how you can get that variation. And I guess to take a step back too, there is an element in specific strength of looking like the sport. But it's a fallacy to assume the more it looks like the sport, the more it will help. It has to have some connection to the sport, but in here, I think the concept of dynamic correspondence is great to help kind of coaches dive into detail about, what are the elements that make an exercise, but you can get lost in a rabbit hole there a bit as well and lose sight again of what the athlete really knew. So I don't remember all the elements of dynamic correspondence, but it's talking about the amplitude of the movement and the intensity and, all these types of elements. And, it's a great tool for understanding, but it's not a very good tool that a coach can pull out on the spot and use. And, a good example of that, like I say, in the hammer throw, it's a very rotational sport. We're generating a lot of strength from, quote unquote, core from the middle and rotating around. We have to keep good stiffness in the middle. So we have a good center of axis of rotation that we're pushing around. And so we do a lot of just simple plate twists. You hold a plate out in front of you and you twist back and forth. I mean, very old school training, the old Soviet videos from the 50s, they're doing the same exact thing. Mm-hmm. But that's a key element of our training. It's nothing special. It's nothing sexy. But when you look at a plate twist, you can do that. There are, probably 50 different variations of a plate twist. And 2 examples would be, you can have your arms fully extended out in front of you, straight in front, and twist back and forth. Or, a different variation would be you have your elbows in close to your body and just have your forearms straight out in front. And if you look at the dynamic correspondence point of view, and even if you use the eyeball test, it would tell you, okay, the arm straight out in front of you is going to be more like the hammer throw. The hammer throw length is super important. We're always fighting the resistance to pull. And the more you pull the implement closer to you, you're slowing it down. So you want to let it be free, let it get further away, and that's going to increase the speed. So if you use all these measures of what is more specific, everything would tell you the longer version. The only issue is with the arms extended version, your limiting factor is not your core strength, what you're trying to build, it's your shoulder strength. These big, strong guys, doing a 25-kilo plate back and forth is nothing. I've seen some of the top hammer throwers, they'll hold 2 25-kilo plates. I can't even, lift that up. But the reason I can't lift it up is not my core issue. It's a shoulder strength issue and the shoulder stability. So your limiting factor when you're holding your arms out is your shoulders. And then so you start to think, well, if we're really trying to train the core, maybe having the arms closer is a bit better because then we're really focusing more on those muscles instead of on the shoulder muscles. So that's just kind of one example of you have to look and see, okay, what does the athlete need? If they have that shoulder strength, great. Put the arms out straight. It's going to look more like the hammer. But if not, don't be afraid to take something that looks maybe a little bit less like the sport, but is better isolating what you actually want to train.
That's a good point. I've got a few things written down. I'm going to probably do them in a random order that won't make sense. But I want to come back to the special strength exercises, and we talked about overload.
Yep.
And you mentioned about, obviously, you're trying to, there's many different factors to what you may be looking to overload in the exercise. One that comes to mind for me is where you might be overloading, say, the wrong thing, or maybe the thing that you don't want to overload. For example, you've probably seen it in rugby when they have the bands around the hips and they're trying to go into a ruck. And someone behind them's pulling them. You see it in grappling as well. You see sometimes people doing exactly the same thing. They're trying to pass guard and they have a band behind them pulling them back. But in reality, there's no one pulling you in those positions, and it's kind of changing the position when you go into the ruck. I'll be interested to hear kind of your thoughts around, I don't even know if I had a question on the back of that, but your thoughts around kind of like using those things where it might not make sense in the grand scheme of things.
I agree. I mean, like in a rugby scenario too, like pulling someone back is going to shift their weight forward. And, that's exactly the opposite of what we want, because in a real live ruck situation, if you're too far forward, you're going to be off feet and you're going to get called for it. So you want to make sure that your balance is back a bit so you can enter the ruck in a strong, low position, but balanced. And so that's part of and if you're going to take a shock, it's going to be coming from the front. So you want to be aware of those factors and take those into place. In a ruck type of scenario like that, trying to, clear out heavier athletes, or again, trying to think about the intensity part of you, like, you set up rucks. Typically, if you have basic ruck cleaning technique, the issue is not necessarily the technique, but it's getting in position soon enough to be able to clear the ruck and being able to recover enough for the next. So you're, cycling to the next ones over and over. And so trying to figure out, okay, what's the limiting factor there and how can we emphasize that? So maybe that's working on the kind of specific fitness point of view so that you're up off your feet quicker. As Eddie Jones used to always say, like, the longer you're on your feet, the longer you're on playing the game. Get up on your feet. You can play, you can view the field, you can get in position better, and then you can clean out the next ruck a bit better. Trying to create scenarios where you have to get a quick reaction time to get to the next one is probably going to be an overload in a different way, but maybe more specific. Also putting the smaller guys against the bigger guys, so they really have to have a challenge to work and get low. If you have a big guy against a small guy, it's easy to clear out the fly half when you're a prop. But if you're a prop trying to clear a fly half, you really have to get the right position. You really have to get low and get that leverage. So trying to find those types of things, I think, are probably going to be more effective. But it takes, first of all, you have to define, okay, why is my team struggling in the rucks, if that's the issue, and then develop some drills around that. And, also it's going to be a lot of talk with the sport coaches who understand the game and how to do it. I think that's another thing with specific strength is we hear the word strength and we think weight room. And a lot of these solutions are going to be coming from how can we manipulate the game on the field a bit, or even, even if it's with the bands, you're still out on the field. You're in a more live environment. There's a rock climbing coach here in Zurich I was talking to a while ago this summer. We were talking about specific strength, and it's a perfect example. Like, specific strength for rock climbing in the gym, it's like you can do all kinds of pull-up variations.
Yeah, you're good.
Yes, you can edit that out hopefully. No, if you're in rock climbing, you're trying to replicate that in the gym. You could do all kinds of pull-up variations. You can do one-arm pull-ups, you can do, one-finger pull-ups, you can do all this kind of stuff. But in the end, you're kind of limited, and it's, a lot of upper body overload type stuff, and the legs are quite involved in actual climbing, and you're not really integrating those. And so, I was asking him, how does he do specific strength? And, how he sets up the routes on the wall. Like if an athlete is having trouble doing overhangs, he's going to have them train extra overhangs and harder overhangs. If they're having trouble getting really fine grips with their hands, that he's going to integrate a lot of those. If they're having trouble getting heel holds or something, he's going to integrate those along the route. So he's trying to identify, okay, where is the athlete's weakness here? Some athletes are good at power moves. Some athletes are good at ones that require a lot of mobility and these types of things. He's trying to figure out what the athlete needs to work on and designing routes for them to use in training based on that. They do a ton of general strength training. They do all that kind of stuff too. But the specific strength stuff is not going to be found in the gym for them. And for majority of sports, not to discount what we do in the gym, because that's also important. And that's not to be overlooked. The general strength stuff is a huge element in all sports, but the specific strength stuff is more likely to be found outside the gym.
And that reminds me of exceeding game speed and all sorts of stuff in rugby we used to do. And then you reminded me as well of the ruck thing. We actually designed something with the sport coaches a while ago where we would hit rucks, but the other element is the decision making of what type of clean out you're going to do based on what that person's coming in. Not to turn this into a rugby podcast, but it's essentially the guy coming in has to make one or two decisions: clean the ruck and then get to the next one. So it's a specific fitness component. You're overloading by hitting a certain number of rucks within that time period, but then you have to make the decision for each ruck as well. So there's probably things you could take from that to potentially design something in combat sports. That's one thing I so want to do so bad, but I'm not sure how it would be possible yet, unless you had someone. I need to link you up with Dr. Andrew Usher as well for his conditioning stuff, but he's got like 3D bloody cameras and shit like that going on, so you can analyze what's going on, find the peak. You could find the peak periods and what's happening in sparring or a match, and then design actual sparring sessions or whatever to exceed the work rate, in the peak periods of those fights or whatever's happening. Like there's so much that could go on there, but it is complex in combat sports because you can't just wear GPS, or you can't just wear wearables because they're gonna, or often because they come off, or if it's competition you can't wear their stuff. But yeah, there's some cool stuff that could come out of something like that.
Definitely.
And then I did want to touch on, we talked about the hammer throw with the plate twist, and I wanted to come back to overload, because as we mentioned, we talked about overload where we're overloading maybe the load itself to overload force, maybe overload velocity, or whatever. But what about, for example, a coordination overload, aka Bosch style? I know we've both kind of gone down that road as well, through various people, and the water bag is probably synonymous with that. So, for example, doing that same exercise with the water bag, where and why would that play into a special strength exercise?
So we do use the water bags quite a bit. I mean, I feel like those have gone in and out of fashion, and also in my own training, I've used them more or less, but they're still a constant, and we still cycle them in, mostly to add a bit of variation, because I think there's something that can be, I mean, I use them in a similar way to a lot of the med ball stuff for my hammer throwers, but it's just a little bit different stimulus. A couple of ways I like to walk bag in training. One, if we're just doing a simple twist, like with our arms out, you get a nice auditory feedback. So you're getting a feedback loop to the athlete about whether they're doing well or not. The faster you're moving back and forth, the louder the water sloshing back and forth, and you can hear that. So, if you're just kind of like going through the motions, going back and forth, which, that's one of my pet peeves with med balls, is a lot of people just kind of go through the motions. It's just like kind of the water, like a soft sound. But if you're going back and forth, it sounds like, big storms coming in on the beach. So first and foremost, you get that feedback for the athlete. But also, one of the things I like is it's not a constant load. The faster you go, then the harder it is to change directions. So it's a bit like a flywheel type of situation where, the faster you're going on the flywheel, the harder it is to stop, and the more eccentric or the more acute eccentric phase you have there. And same thing with the aqua bag. Once you get that water moving from left to right, if you want to switch and go from right to left, instead of being, the water might weigh 5 kilos, it's going to have, 10 kilos of force. Again, I'm not a biomechanist, so I'm just making up numbers here. But, you not only have to stop the implement, you have to stop the inertia of the water inside of it and go back. So that's an advantage there. And what we might do, for example, is the hammer throw, we use 4 turns, and to do 4 turns well, you have to have like I said, a nice center of mass, a good axis of rotation. You want to be kind of in the middle. If you're too off on one side or the other side, you're going to be thrown off. If you pike forward too much, for example, it's going to make it hard to accelerate. So what we'll do often is we'll do 1 turn in one direction, and then have the athlete, kind of stop on a dime and go back the other direction. To be able to do that, it's really forcing them to have that core stability and the kind of chest up posture as they hit that 0 position and go back the other way. If they're not in that position, you'll notice it as a coach, they're not able to turn on the spot and stop on the spot. So again, you get the feedback as an athlete, and as a coach, are they even able to accomplish that? Because the coordinative demands are a bit harder. If they don't have the strength to hold that position, they're not going to be able to execute the coordination. So for me, that's kind of one example, that extra stimulus really exposes an athlete if they're out of posture. And the same thing, Bosch will use that a lot more in the sprinting environment as well too. And the idea is, if you're focusing on hip lock or something like that, and you're in that position, you're not going to be able to hold it. So it exposes it because it puts a bit more coordinative demand on that. So it really exposes your weaknesses. So that's one example we use on like the rotational side. It's, it's same type of movement, but you're getting a slightly different stimulus. And it really kind of, it depends. Are we really focusing on the force generation element of the rotation, or are we focusing on the postural element? So once we get to the postural elements and that more coordinative type of thing, then we'll put in the aqua bags a bit more.
It sounds like there's a lot of, say, trunk or quote unquote core work with these movements. So when you're doing more general strength exercises, are you still attacking the trunk or core through more general means? Like a lot of people will kind of default to like planks, side planks, step bugs, whatever else. Does that stuff make up a large portion of that training, or is it just, hey, we're doing all this other stuff, until we don't really need to do all that?
I mean, we're doing a lot supplemental. I'm not a big fan of the like real basic plank sit-ups and stuff like that. So we're typically making a little bit more.
Do you want to go into detail why?
I just don't. The plank, for example, again, it's not very specific because it's typically the only way the way most people continue to add overload to a plank is just more time. And that's the time element is not really relevant to our sport. And it's also in a very controlled environment. You're not moving. I mean, every sport we're doing, we're moving, and it's just holding the isometric position. So we'll do plank-like movements. We do a lot of stuff with rings. So, ring extensions or barbell rollouts where you're trying to hold that core stability throughout a range of motion. So like I said, we'll do a lot of plank-like movements in that regard, or with the rings extension or one arm extension or, iron crosses or things like that, where we're really working a bit more dynamic through range of movement, holding the core stability. So similar area, but maybe like one step more advanced. And we do a lot more also eccentric type of stuff with the core. I think I talked about med balls. A lot of people go through the motions, and you tell someone to do a chest pass back and forth 10 times, and it's just kind of you're not getting a lot of stimulus because it's not a super heavy load. So, but for our shot putters, for example, I basically just have them go ward each other and say, take it, instead of a chest pass, kind of have it up by your neck, two-handed, and do kind of a two-handed shot put back and forth. And, you get these big, strong dudes, just to catch the ball is a huge stimulus. And so you're getting that eccentric component for one person to catch it and throw it back. And you see how many seconds does it take you to get 10 reps? So you're really getting them to force it back and forth a bit more. And that's a bit more upper body, but we can do the same thing with like a side throw. So, sling it from your hip to your partner, kind of crop. I'm on my right side, go across to their other side, back and forth 10 times. You're getting a huge load just from catching it. And then it's a lot more elastic movement as well, where you have to catch, or plyometric, you could say, from catching and throwing it back. So, trying to take those basic exercises instead of just kind of a, standard med ball would be a chest pass or, a V-sit, Russian throw back and forth to a partner. And those, not that those don't have benefits, but I think you capture the benefits of those at a pretty early stage in your career. And so trying to find a stimulus that'll keep pushing the athlete forward, you need to amp it up a little bit. So that's where we try to make it a bit more reactive throws, a bit more plyometric, and in that regard.
That's a good segue into the exercise classification you mentioned earlier. Bondarchuk's exercise classification. Do you want to maybe just run through that and how that kind of works, I guess, within the sport and within the program?
So I alluded to a little bit already, and he tries to break things down into 4 categories. And the first is the competitive exercise. So that's your sport. In the hammer throw, it's throwing the hammer. In complex sports, it's a bit more difficult because, as I said, you have so many different movements and stuff, but it's essentially playing your sport. Then he has specific developmental exercises, which are breaking that sport down into its parts. So into specific movements, trying to overload those. That's what we've been talking about here, kind of the specific strength type.
Yeah.
Then he has specific preparatory exercises. That's where you're using the same muscles and energy systems as your sport, but in different types of movements. So as a hammer thrower doing a squat or a clean or something like that, I'm using the leg muscles, I'm using them explosively, all that. It just doesn't look like the hammer throw. So they're specific in the regards we're using the same muscles and we're developing them explosively, but it looks different. And then you have general preparatory exercises. It's going to be kind of the work capacity work we do, or things that are using different energy systems, different muscles, the warm-ups, all that auxiliary stuff on top of it. And so that's kind of the four categories. It's maybe less precise than some of the other exercise classification systems. You could sit here all day and debate, is this, is some small-sided game, is that a competitive exercise or is that a specific developmental exercise? And, in the end, it's a tool to help you better plan your training, and you don't need to really nitpick on the details. What's important for Bondarchuk and what's important for me is you understand how much work you're doing in each category, and you need to be doing work in each category. If you only you might think the more specific stuff is more important, but if you only do specific stuff, you're going to hit a ceiling. You see this all the time with the 12-year-old tennis phenomenons who just play only tennis. They don't have that athletic potential to reach the next level. So they might have the best technique in the world and the best game sense, but they're just slow and they don't have the endurance for 5-set championship matches. So you need all those categories, but you need a balance of them. And you also need to realize the priorities of them. So with Bondarchuk, we would often train 10 times a week. So we'd have 10 sessions and we would throw 10 sessions a week, but we would also squat 10 sessions a week. And that's what people they forget. They focus on all the specific stuff. We might do 2 sets at 60%, it might not be super heavy, but we're doing that general work every single session and it accumulates with volume over time. So he really placed an importance on that. But like I said, you need all of that, but you want to keep your priorities the same. You want to understand your priorities, and the priorities is going to be the competitive sport. If you want to be a better fighter, that's your goal. And you can't lose sight of that. And you can't get so wrapped up in the weightlifting that, you're doing 5 heavy gym sessions a week, 2 or 3 times heavy squat. You get on the mat and you're just dead. You can't grapple. And that's a situation where your, third priority, let's say, if you categorize them by priorities, your third priority is overweighing your first priority. And by taking kind of an inventory of what work am I doing in what category, am I doing something in each category because I need to be doing it, and are the priorities still there? You can kind of get an overview of, is my training plan in the right direction? So that's, I think, the usefulness of that tool is to kind of get an overview of, are you doing the right type of work, and are you doing it in the right type of quantities and priorities?
You mentioned you're throwing, but you're also squatting in those 10 sessions as well. So does that mean every session you're always touching on every single one of the exercise classifications? And it's not, you don't even have a day where it's, we're just doing specific stuff or just doing general stuff, etc.
I mean, you can do it in different ways. What we would typically do is do a little bit of everything every session. So, we'd throw for half an hour. We'd warm up 10, 15 minutes. We'd throw for 30, 40 minutes, and then we'd do 15, 20 minutes in the gym to close it out. And we do that, every session. You could also do, if you had 2 sessions a day, you do a morning session, the specific stuff, an afternoon session, the general stuff. You could do 2 sessions specific, 1 session general. You could split up in however you want. His preference was, especially in a highly technical sport where you're really trying to refine small, like, a centimeter or 2 of difference in technique can be a huge difference. And we've taken tens of thousands of reps. So you need a huge number of reps just to make a change. More short sessions technically was benefiting us because we were fresher and we had a better feeling for it. And so he chose to break it up that way. But in another sport, you might do it differently. In a team sport, you might have to do it differently just because of player availability. So it's not necessarily that that's better or worse, but that's just how we set it up in our training environment.
How do you think it would, I guess, if someone wanted to go down the Bondarchuk route for combat sports, like a more chaotic version, or even rugby? I guess they're both pretty similar in terms of setups, in terms of number of trainings people are doing a week, etc. How does that fit together? Could someone take the system and potentially use it, quote unquote, successfully in that? Or is it just, the sport is so, there's so much to do in that sport that it's very hard to implement something like this?
I think you could definitely do it. I think what you would need to look at is kind of how much time you have to prepare for each, match or fight or whatever you want to say. And, if you have what do I see? And sometimes from afar in combat sports is you might have, 8-week buildup or 12-week buildup, and then on to the next one, on to the next one, on the next one. So there's not a lot of long-term planning involved there because you're just looking at the next fight in front of you. But I think if you're able to take that long-term outlook, even across, 3-4 blocks, I think it could work well. It's hard to really work on everything at once. I'm not a proponent of block periodization for the most part, because how block periodization is traditionally sold is you work exclusively on one thing or predominantly on one thing to the exclusion of others. And in a sport like yours, you need to work. You can't just neglect one area, especially if you have a fight coming up. Like if your ground-based work is the focus, you can't just neglect your other stuff. Like you have to have a little bit of everything in there. But I'm a big fan of themes or focus or putting, overweight. So it's like this training block, we're going to do, 70%. We're going to really put a focus on this one skill we want to improve. And then we have other stuff in there to kind of hold those other skills as well. But that's going to be the real focus for this block. And then maybe the next block, it'll be something else. And if you have it over 3 to 4 blocks, you're covering, a little bit of an overload on all those types of areas. So I think that could work. And even in the hammer throw, our competitive season is quite short. We might have 3, 4, 5 months a year where we're competing. So we have a pretty long buildup. But if you look at our training blocks, we might spend 4 weeks working on heavy hammers. So that's more of a strength emphasis. Then we spend, 4 or 5 weeks working on light hammers, which is a speed emphasis. So yeah, the training looks similar block to block, and we have one skill we're training for, but we're trying to pull out those specific elements and build on them at different times. I think you could do that too. In your sport, you'd have to look down and see, okay, what are the 3, 4 critical success factors? And, kind of look around those. Is it work capacity? Is it, power? Is it, technical skills in different positions, or these types of things, and just try and build blocks around that. And I think the benefit of Bondarchuk's programming is it's a bit repetitive, but that's the goal, is you're really trying to emphasize a skill or a strength or whatever over and over until you get better at it. You're trying to get enough stimulus that you improve at it. And, Bosch, you mentioned earlier, I asked him once, because he's very focused on motor learning, and you never hear him talk about periodization. And I asked him, well, how would you periodize over a longer term? How would you put together a training plan? And his answer, I think, applies to Bondarchuk as well. He goes, well, you work on one thing until it's better, and then you work on something else. So, you can't improve everything at once. If you want to improve ankle stiffness, okay, let's put some drills together for a block and work on ankle stiffness. And once that's a bit better, maybe we, improve force production for the next part. And then, it's block by block, and trying to figure out how to put those elements together into a better athlete.
I'm with you on the block periodization stuff. I'm not such a huge fan of focusing on especially when, it starts with hypertrophy as well. It's kind of like, do you need to do essentially almost like a bodybuilding style block before going into your strength work? Is that going to really benefit you? And then by the time you hit the power block, you haven't touched the other stuff.
But that's also the difference between like block periodization in theory and in the books. And then when you look at the top practitioners who are using block periodization, they're doing what we're talking about now. They're mixing it. So I think it's just a gap between the theory and practice, because most practitioners realize, okay, well, we can't do only hypertrophy for 6 months and expect the athlete after that to still be able to sprint. Like, you got to move in some athletic stuff. You got to put in some other stuff. You can't do one thing to the complete exclusion of others. So the top practitioners are already making those adjustments. But I think the young coaches, they don't see those. They just read the book and they see that and not realize some of the nuance there and putting it into play.
You mentioned as well around work capacity. I like this topic just because I think a lot of people, they rather think about it as strength training or conditioning training. And when they think conditioning, it's kind of like running, row. But work capacity, I like just because I feel like it encompasses more things than just traditional quote unquote cardio. And you mentioned things like medicine ball throws. You got things like medicine ball circuits you can use. Nick Garcia has an awesome presentation in your Hammer Media with the jump circuits. I've basically stolen that completely and used that forever now because it's so damn good. To maybe just dive into how a work capacity maybe block would look, and what you're trying to achieve out of what you can actually do with work capacity exercises versus just traditional running and rowing, etc.
Like anything, the endurance part of sports has to be specific. And I saw this all the time in rugby, where in the off season people
people go around 5Ks and around the track.
Yeah, exactly. They'd run 5Ks, they'd run around the track. Maybe they'd even do some intervals or something. And then you get to your first game, and everyone's posted great Bronco times, but everyone's gassed by the 60-minute because they don't have the contact conditioning, like being able to take hits and place hits over and over and get up from the ground and down from the ground. All that has a metabolic cost, and it's different than just going out for a 5K or 10K run. You look at it, like the top players are probably only doing 10K over 80 minutes or something, if that. And it's all those things in between that are really what's fatiguing the athlete. And so trying to figure out ways to condition an athlete that are going to be a bit more specific in some sports is adding some contact into that, adding some wrestling elements. It's also then looking at, are you in a steady state for all that time? Or are you doing fast movements over and over. So, do you have to punch, like do those powerful movements and have the endurance to recover and keep producing power instead of just having that steady state. Same thing in rugby. It's not about who can run medium speed the whole game. It's who can put another fast sprint in the 80th minute. So it's the ability to recover and then produce, a non-aerobic type of performance in the end. So that's going to come back here. I mean, we typically, and even a sport like the hammer throw, our sport lasts a couple seconds. So in the competition itself, we have like zero aerobic or fitness component. But the fitter we are, the more training we can put in. So we want a certain level of fitness because, if you're going to get fatigued after half an hour of training, you're not going to be able to accumulate the reps you want. But if you can put in, one sec, where was I there?
About accumulating reps. Because
You have to be able to put in, be able to do an hour and a half, 2 hour training of good quality and not have that quality suffer. So we have, we do a lot of circuit type stuff, but again, we're trying to take 20, 30, 40, 50 explosive throws. So what does that mean? Like we're doing a lot of dumbbell circuits where we're doing explosive movements, maybe 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. But it's weighted, it's moving weights, it's being powerful, and, maybe gradually trying to reduce that recovery time or even reduce that work time by, given a set number of reps. Does that take you 30 seconds to complete or 25 seconds or 20 seconds? So being able to increase the cadence, increase the repetition speed there. Gambetta's leg circuit is another example too.
Dude, I still haven't been able to complete that. That's so damn hard.
We included the first month or so of training to get athletes back in shape, but then it's, once we can get a baseline there, as I said, we're not an endurance sport, so we don't need to go all in on that. But, it's more focusing on repeating fast movements over and over than just doing a steady state slow movement over. So, that's something we look at on the endurance side, but also again, you can look at that in fighting sports and strength sports. Yeah, you probably, doing some steady state stuff is not going to hurt. And, but if you think that's going to be the key to your endurance, you're missing an element there. You also need to have that more specific element. And, if your rounds are 2 minutes long, we'll do some sparring with 3 minutes rounds, do some sparring with 4 minute rounds, really put yourself into that red zone and see, does your technique suffer? Are you no longer able to keep your guard up? Are like those types of things to really challenge your specific work capacity in the match time. And then also, if you're able to get, as I said, for a lot of sports, is about developing the work capacity so you can get the training in that you need to get better.
How much of those, I guess, specific work capacity drills, like your dumbbell circuits, etc., you mentioned like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. How much are you worrying? Are you worrying more about, say, output and performance versus maybe trying to target some kind of specific physiological adaptation with these?
It's more,
as in like if you're getting better at doing the thing and you're able to complete it faster, etc., like that's kind of more what you're worried about versus are we targeting this specific adaptation within this energy system, etc., etc.
This type of stuff is typically used in more of our foundational phase. And so it's 1 or 2 steps removed from improving sports performance. So I'm less focused on specific outputs and are we creating more watts of power? Are we doing it 1 second faster, 1 second slower? I'm more looking at the general trends. If we're using the same weight in a dumbbell circuit, are we getting better at it? Or are we able to add 2 or 3 more kilos and still, keep our cadence and keep our time? I also use them typically like the first phase of the year. We're not doing a whole lot with the barbell, but we'll do barbell-like movements with the dumbbell. So it's kind of a segue for me. So we might do dumbbell snatch as a movement in a dumbbell circuit or something. But for me, it's okay, when that's looking good and it's ready to go, that means, okay, we're ready to pick up a barbell and move on to normal snatches. We'll do dumbbell goblet squats or things like that. And that's a kind of a segue into, normal squatting the next phase too. So it's just kind of trying to see, are you able to hold the posture and the techniques throughout? Are you slowly able to increase the load? And then once, you're at a certain point, then we'll move over into the more traditional type of lifting. Other sports, you're going to have that element year round because the work capacity is going to be front and center of your sport. But for us, because it's a smaller role, it's more just kind of doing that minimum bit to make sure we can get the work in and then moving on to the quote unquote real training or the more standard training.
Do you have those dumbbell circuits in your Hammer Media library?
Yeah, we got some different versions. Yeah. So I like Nick's, like again from Nick Garcia, a lot of this is coming from him, but he'll do, trying to think here too, like clean high pull to
I remember that.
front squat maybe 6 reps each. So 6 reps dumbbell high pulls, 6 reps front squats with the front rack and the dumbbells, alternate press, 6 reps, and then like a gorilla row or some type of bent over row for 6 reps. So they're kind of all body workouts too there. I mean, but it makes it a rather than a standard bodybuilding phase, you're adding in the work capacity a little bit too, and you're getting those preparatory movements to prepare you for the weightlifting down the road. Instead of, dumbbell high pull is a good preparatory for a clean, might do a 1-arm snatch, like I said, instead.
Yeah.
You might do a goblet squat instead of a front squat. I mean, you can play around with it, but typically it's some type of pulling movement, some type of leg movement, some type of pressing movement, and some type of rowing or pulling movement, and cycling those through. Typically we'll use like a 1-to-1 ratio. So if it, takes you 40 seconds, then you'll get 40 seconds off, that type of thing. And then, we'll add week to week. We'll maybe in the preseason add, 3 sets and then 4 sets and then 5 sets, and still trying to maintain good quality. And then eventually, if that is working, then we'll add weight to that. Or if they're out of shape and they're just doing slow times, then we'll start focusing on the times a bit too. But most athletes, if they can get kind of a decent time, then we'll focus more on just adding up a little bit of load.
It's just, you're starting with just like a moderately loaded dumbbells.
Yeah. We're a bit limited because we don't have a huge dumbbell range at our gym. So like, it's never super heavy on my side, but it's still, when you're doing 4 movements after each other, that's also, if you do 6 to 8 reps of movement. So you're talking 24 to 32 reps, which ends up being, even if you're at a moderate movement and you're alternating exercises, that's you're getting a good sweat on.
Connecting some dots in my brain. I was talking with Bill Smart the other day. He'll be listening to this on the replay. Out of New Zealand, he's currently doing a lot of sports science for city kickboxing. We're talking about peripherally biasing conditioning. I'm thinking now, like these dumbbell circuits and stuff, you're going to be biasing the peripheral adaptations on, with the added resistance versus, doing like a light run or row where it's going to be, you're still going to get peripheral adaptation, but you're mainly targeting central adaptation. So it's an interesting, potential way someone could start to do that with their lower level work. I think that's all right. Something came up and it fixed itself, I think, on Riverside. But I think that's everything I had for you there, Martin. Where can people find and follow you? You still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, my mic got disconnected.
No, perfect.
Like I said, on my site, hmmrmedia.com, there's a ton of resources. We're on Instagram too. I'm not posting as much as I used to, but you can still DM me there and reach out. But those are probably the best avenues to reach out. And a lot of the stuff we talked about is up on the site. We have a member section, obviously, so more information available to members, but we got a lot of free stuff up there as well. But the dumbbell circuits, the leg circuits, the special strength, we got a couple presentations explaining the exercise classification and specific strength exercises, med ball circuits, and things like that. So there are a lot of resources talking about a lot of these topics, not just for throwers, because we've had a lot of questions for people like you looking to apply these other sports. So we try to keep an open mind and help coaches connect the dots to other sports.
Yeah, there's some really good combat conditioning stuff on there too, for people who are looking to maybe add some stuff to their training too. But I appreciate you coming on, Martin, and sharing everything, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.